Hey everyone, how y'all doing? Welcome back to my channel. So today I'm doing the very first episode in my How I Outline My Novels series. I'm really excited for this series. I asked you guys on Twitter a long time ago if you wanted to see something like this where I break down my outlining process into different episodes or videos so I can go a bit more in depth, and you guys seemed to be interested. And so here I finally am making these videos. So this first episode is just going to be a brief overview of my outlining system. So I'm just going to be kind of going over the entire process that I have and kind of giving you guys a little sneak peek into what's going to be coming in the following 2 episodes, because this is going to be a 3-episode series. So I have a couple of disclaimers to throw out there before we get into this video. So the first one is I am not an expert at outlining, so this series isn't necessarily me telling you how to outline your books. It's just showing you an inside look into how I personally outline my books and what has seemed to work for me in the past. But this doesn't mean that this is like an amazing outlining system or that I've worked out all the kinks or anything. It's not perfect, but it is what it is. The next disclaimer is that outlining is one of those things where I do it and then immediately when I stop doing it, I don't remember how I did it. So this was kind of a struggle for me to remember how I actually outline my books. And it's also one of those things that changes with each book slightly. Like each book requires a different process almost. This is the best that I could come up with for my outlining process. It's pretty much on the nose, but it does change slightly depending on the project that I'm working on and just kind of what feels right. And there's a million things thrown into this one outlining process. I don't really know, but there's a few different categories for how I go about outlining. So we start with brainstorming, character profiles, world building, I guess, and then the actual outline. So let's just go into each little thing. I'm gonna give you guys a brief overview of them all, and then I will see you back here on my channel again for the following episodes. I usually start off with brainstorming. That's typically just the first thing that feels right to me. I just like to brainstorm and brain dump and get all of my ideas into one place before I actually start doing anything to do with characters or the actual plot or anything like that. I just want to brainstorm the story and try to figure out what the story is actually going to look like. So everything that I can possibly think of goes into this brain dump, whether that's about characters or the plot or like just things I want to be in the book, trope or quote. Sometimes I even get ideas for little snippets that are going to be at some point in the story. I'll write those down as well. My brain dump can happen in a few different ways. Sometimes I'll do it on the computer, sometimes I'll do it in a notebook. I typically have a journal that looks like this for my novels. This one is for Reasons Why Not To. Has a ton of brain dumpy things in here. And then this one is for The Show Must Go On, and this one is where I actually did the brain dump in the journal. I kind of just wrote a bunch of details that just came to mind. Whatever I thought of went into this section of the journal. I typically do brainstorming things by hand, but there is the odd occasion where I will do it on my computer. Brainstorming is crucial to my outlining process. I find that I can't continue on figuring out what my book is about without doing like a few brain dumps beforehand, just trying to jot down any and all ideas that I may have for this book. But I definitely need to have that time to think about the idea and play around with it and different things that I can do, different avenues that I can take, and just trying to brainstorm absolutely everything that I can about the story and just kind of get to know it, because there are so many different ways that you can take a certain story. You can get that like little seed of an idea and then it just kind of spirals from there. But people sometimes will ask me how I get my story ideas, like where the inspiration came from for one of my stories, and I honestly don't know, because I will get like a little kernel of an idea and then I can never remember how that little kernel of an idea turned into a story. But basically this brainstorming brain dump step that takes that kernel of an idea and turns it into a full-fledged novel, or at least starts to take the form of a full-fledged novel, and gives me something to jump off of. So I really enjoy the brainstorming process. Actually, it's at the very beginning of like a new work in progress, and it's that time where like it's still all new and shiny and you're really excited about it before you know you get all bogged down by self-doubt and having to actually draft the book and realizing that it's not gonna be perfect the first time you write it or even the second time you write it. It's fine. Brainstorming for me is the honeymoon phase of writing. It's when things are good. I mean, I might get stuck a couple of times, but it's where I'm like probably the happiest because it's all new and I haven't messed it up yet. So once I've brainstormed a bit, I don't really have necessarily like a set step-by-step like, oh, I'm gonna do this next. Sometimes I do multiple things at the same time. Sometimes I'll switch things around, but typically the next thing I will work on are my characters. I outline my characters by using character profiles. Are they actually helpful? I don't know, because do I ever look at them when I'm writing? No. But I think that just by writing it down, writing all this information down somewhere, does kind of like commit it to memory a bit, and I will use a lot of the things that I wrote down when I'm writing, but sometimes, you know, I don't, and that's fine. So there are a lot of things that go into creating characters for me, like I said. So I do use character profiles, and I have kind of like 2 different character profiles that I've kind of merged together to make one, and I'll talk more about that in the next episode of the series where I talk about how I come up with characters and whatnot. And then I also just have like a few of my own own little questions that I've popped in there that I think are important depending on what story I'm writing. Sometimes the questions change depending on the story. And then another crucial part of characters, which kind of ties into the brainstorming a little bit. Like I said, some of these things do tend to overlap and happen all at once and intermingle and whatnot. I use Pinterest a lot for character inspiration. If I figure out what the characters look like, I just scroll on Pinterest to try to find what I think my characters look like. And I typically write down these character profiles in my notebooks. I don't actually have them written down for The Show Must Go On. In this notebook, they're like on loose leaf paper, but I do have reasons why not to. Characters down in here, this is just an example, a little sneak peek into what Lila's looks like. I honestly don't enjoy creating characters, but it's something that I've come to appreciate a little bit more. It used to be more like pulling teeth than it is now, and I think that's honestly because these two character profiles that I've kind of merged together has really cracked the code for me on creating characters. So that's great, and I actually enjoy the process a little bit more than I used to, which obviously is a good thing. The next step in my outlining process is world building, and another disclaimer, I am not good at world building. I write contemporary books, and so I'm still trying to figure out what world building means for me in a contemporary setting. So it's something that I actually never used to do until recently with Reasons Why Not To, because I'm like, oh, you know, her world should probably feel a bit more real and encompassing, and, you know, it's more than just setting it in the real world, you know, like she has her own community, her own people, and her own like routines, and I need to figure those things out, and that's kind of what I lump into world building. But I'm not good at it. I'm still learning what I need to do for contemporaries. So if you guys write contemporaries and have any tips on world building for contemporaries, let me know down below because I could use some help. But yeah, like I said, since I do write contemporary, it does take considerably less world building than a fantasy type of novel would. So if you write fantasies, this portion probably won't be that helpful to you. Not like it's gonna be helpful to the contemporary writers either, because like I said, I don't know what I'm doing. There are a few key things that I do take into consideration when I'm sitting down and trying to figure out world building. I also lump this in with like outlining and brainstorming. It's not necessarily its own thing where I sit down and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna world build, but it is like a step in the process, I suppose. No, Joey. I'm filming. You can't sit on mommy's lap. I'm sorry. So world building for me usually consists of figuring out where my characters live. I typically set my novels around where I live because that's what I know best, but it's kind of like figuring out what kind of environment they live in, where they live, and all that jazz. And then also specific settings my scenes take place in. That's houses, specific bedrooms, or just rooms in general, stores, schools, things like that, and just figuring out what those look like. And you will definitely learn more about how I go about doing that in the next episode, where I'm also talking about world building along with characters. But I do have like a bit of a system for how I figure out those kinds of environments and places. And also world building for me differs for each novel. It requires different things, different settings. For example, Reasons Why Not To takes place during the summer, so I don't have to worry about her school setting necessarily, whereas The Show Must Go On does take place during school, and so I do have to figure out school because that is the biggest setting. World building is still something that I'm trying to tackle. So like I said, if you have any tips for world building for contemporary novels, let me know down below. And then we get to the outline. The actual outlining process. So once I've done those other steps and I feel like I have enough to go on to actually create my outline, that is when I will pull out Save the Cat Writes a Novel by Jessica Brody. This has been my saving grace. I bought this book at the beginning of the year, but I had used the Save the Cat beat sheet last year as well, but it's so much more helpful to actually have the book. So if you have the means, I definitely recommend buying this book, or at least checking it out from a library so you can kind of see it. But it is so invaluable, and I love this book a lot, and it's really helped me crack the code on outlining because I've tried so many different outlining methods, like the snowflake method, the 3-act structure, which is kind of similar to this one, but like worded better in my opinion. Scene cards, like writing down on index cards, post-it notes. I've tried so many different things, and this is the only one that I feel like works for me. I feel like so many outlining methods like focus around like fantasy books in particular, but this one I feel like works for almost all novels, if not all novels. I mean, I only write contemporary, so I don't really know, but it puts it in a way where it feels like it's applicable to anything, which I find really helpful. But Jessica Brody actually adapted this book from the original Save the Cat, which is for screenwriting, and she explains it in an easy to understand way, but for novels, which obviously that's what I write, so that's helpful to me as opposed to the screenwriting one, which just wouldn't explain things in the same way. And what I also really love about this book is she provides modern day examples of books for all the different beats. So more than likely you've hopefully read at least one of the books that she mentions throughout this book, because they are quite modern. There's like the Hunger Games. I think she mentions Wonder, if I'm not mistaken, which we love. She mentions The Hate You Give. She mentions Everything. She mentions so many more modern day examples to give you really a range of things that hopefully you have read so you can understand some of the examples. novels, there's nothing worse than reading a writing craft book and they're referencing something and you have no idea what they're talking about, so it doesn't help you. This one was really, really helpful to kind of see how the beats actually are in books that I've read and loved, because then it helps me visualize. I'm a rather extensive outliner, so my outlines can typically range from about 15,000 words to 30,000 words. I'm not entirely sure, but they can be quite extensive, and that's because I do it scene by scene. I figure out every single scene in my book. I try to stick in as much detail as I can, because the worst thing when you're writing is getting stuck. And I find that if my outlines are not really, really extensive, then I will get stuck and I won't know what to do. Another disclaimer for my outline is I don't always follow it to a T. Sometimes as I'm writing, the outline won't feel right anymore, or scenes won't feel right anymore, either where I've put it or just in general they don't feel right anymore, so I'll just skip over it or change it or whatever, do what I have to do as I'm writing to make it feel right. Or sometimes a character will just completely take over and change what I have planned. There are many times when I was writing Reasons Why Not To, and maybe a little bit in The Show Must Go On, where my main characters or my love interests would just completely say something or do something that I didn't plan. And guys, sometimes it sounds crazy when writers say that characters have a mind of their own and they will just do things and we'll be like, what are you doing? It sounds crazy, but it happens, and I don't know how to explain it other than my fingers are typing and I'm obviously like writing the words, but I have no control over it. And I know that sounds weird, but if you're a writer, obviously if you're watching this video, you probably are a writer. Like it just makes sense and it just happens. But I don't want to ever pressure myself to fully commit to the outline that I've created. I do give myself some leeway to walk off the trail a little bit, as long as I like, you know, make my way back to my overarching plan, because I don't want to mess up the outline too bad. But I need that outline there so that I can push through the story, know where I'm going, and if it changes a little bit along the way, that's okay. But like I mentioned earlier, I cannot write a book if it's not fully detailed and outlined and planned out. Outlines are very crucial to my writing process. So that is the brief rundown of how I outline my books. So the second episode is going to be focused on my brainstorming, my characters, and my world building. I just lumped all of those three together because I feel like I don't have enough to say about them to constitute one whole video for them. So those are going to be lumped together in the next episode. And then the third episode will be all about the actual outlining and how I use Save the Cat and the beat sheet to outline my novels, because I also add a few other things besides just Save the Cat into my outlining process. So I'm very excited. I hope you guys are also excited for this series and to kind of be taken deeper into my outlining process. I feel like I do talk about it a lot when I'm actually vlogging, so if you guys want to watch my writing vlogs, I do recommend it because I do go quite into detail as I'm doing things. So I definitely recommend checking out my writing vlogs and keeping up with them if you want to see what I'm doing as I'm doing it and how I'm doing it and all that jazz. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to give it a huge thumbs up. Comment down below what your outlining process is for your book, because I'd really love to know. Subscribe if you've not yet already, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!